Why is it so hard to get out of debt? We'll discuss it. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Okay, Ted, today's question. Why is it so hard to get out of debt? So, would you agree that debt is very common?
Extremely common.
So if I was to pick a 30, 40, or 50-year-old Canadian at random, it's likely they would have debt.
That's right, depending on, and they'd be slightly different types of debt at each one of those, but the basic underlying problem is, though, they've got too much of it.
And so how does this all start then? If you're 25 years old, what's likely to be the cause of your debt?
Wouldn't be surprising if you have student loan debt at that point. So you finished high school, instead of embarking immediately on a career, you went for some kind of post-secondary education, didn't have any money saved, so you borrowed to do it.
And if you're 30, 40, or 50 years old, or let's put the 60-year-olds in there so that we can be included in this discussion too. It's the older you get, the less likely it's student loan debt.
Right. It transverses, not the right word.
I don't know if that's a word or
not. It transitions, let's try that word, into different types. So you've got the student loan debt and the more expensive types of consumer credit, right, for the younger crowd because they haven't got a history of financial stability, so they can't access the less expensive types of credit that they'll transition into. 30 and 40-year-olds have more credit cards and lines of credit. 40s and 50-year-olds, you've got equity in a house, probably second mortgage lines of credit. And 50 and 60, you've got all types of credit. Something's gone wrong and you've used too much of it.
Now, when you say something's gone wrong, like I understand if I buy a house, I get a mortgage. That's not really something going wrong.
Right.
But what are the common things that go wrong?
Well, so unfortunately, the most common one is probably a marital breakdown. So you're in some kind of relationship, you've got multiple income streams coming into the household, and then suddenly you don't. So not only have you lost an income stream, but all of their expenses have probably increased as well. You used to have two households. You used to have one household. Now you have two. I'm just mixed up today. I don't know what's going on here.
It's that whole transitioning thing.
That's right.
So, Ted Transitions. That'll be
Help me.
The title of today's show. So, the thing is, we're recording this in the afternoon. We always record in the morning.
Oh, so you think I haven't had my nap? Is that what you're suggesting?
Right. It's almost nap time. And neither one of us obviously is as sharp the later we go in the day. So, okay, so that kind of sets the stage. So let's go through, and I've got a whole bunch of points here as to why is it, because that's today's question, why is it so hard to get out of debt? So to me, the obvious answer is math.
Sure.
And math is, there's more going out than coming in.
Well, but think through it too. Most people that have debt didn't just incur one huge loan. Like, so yesterday I decided I needed $50,000. I went out and I took it and I blew it at the racetrack. Well, most people I needed a little bit to get by and then something went wrong with the car. Maybe I threw in a vacation. Probably not, because most of the folks we talk to haven't done that in a couple of years. But it's accumulated over time. And so it's kind of unreasonable to think that if it took you 2 or 3 years to run up $50,000 or $60,000 worth of debt, that you could pay it off in a day.
So how long does it take to pay off $60,000 in debt?
Well, at current interest rates, if you're making the minimum payments, forever.
And so if there's no interest on my debt, I happen to have one of these zero interest loans.
That's great. Can I borrow from you, please?
Then even if I can pay $1,000 a month,
it's still going to be 5 years to pay off $60,000.
And if the interest rate is higher than zero, if it's, let's say it's 20% because it's credit cards.
Okay.
So 20% on 60,000.
So the first year's interest is?
That's $1,000 a month.
Right. So if you're making that $1,000 payment you were just talking about, all you're paying is interest.
So there you go. That's why it's so hard to get a debt.
Right.
If you've got credit card type debt at 20% interest, and we're not talking about the high interest stuff.
No, we're not talking about the store cards or the
finance companies and payday loans and everything.
Right.
So if you have a 20% interest credit card, $60,000 in debt, it's $1,000 a month in interest. And obviously we're doing some simple math here because I understand about compounding and all the rest of it.
Right.
But you would have to pay $1,000 a month just to stay even.
Well, and the typical credit card wants you to pay off 3%, including the interest. So they want you to be paying $1,800 a month on that debt.
Which is gradually chipping away at it. But if you're paying off 3% of the principal every month, then you're in debt pretty much forever.
Great.
Like it's as simple as that.
Indentured service. Hey, I got that one right.
Hey, there you go.
Thing.
We're getting the words right here. So
wake up, brain.
So why is it so hard to get out of debt? Because the numbers are big.
Right.
It's math. It's kind of as simple as that.
Yep.
So
well, and you've answered the second point too. So the numbers are big and they're growing. right? So there's this thing called interest that most people don't really appreciate. Now, interest is the cost of using somebody else's money. So if you have money in the bank and the bank is lending it to other folks, they pay you interest. When you are using the bank's money, you're paying them interest. And I guarantee you it's always more than what they're paying you.
That's exactly right. There's a spread there somewhere.
Right.
And you're right. When you buy a car and you get a car loan, you don't think of what the car costs. You think of what the monthly payment is.
Yeah, they've taught us all to not think about the total cost of borrowing. It's what's coming out of my paycheck.
So a $50,000 car, I don't know if there is such a thing because it's been a decade or more since I bought a car.
Civic.
It's a Honda Civic. There you go. So, and if I get an 8-year loan at whatever a reasonable interest rate is, I'm not paying $50,000. I'm paying 70, 80, 90. I don't know what the number is.
It'll be 70 something.
So it's a massive number, and that extra 20,000, that's interest. But I'm thinking, oh well, my payment's only $500 every paycheck,
right?
And so I miss the big numbers there. So okay, again, that's back to math. Now let's talk about your favorite topic because I don't think we've talked about it yet here on season number 11. Right. Good old predatory lending.
Oh yes, we love these guys.
And so I've been using this example of a 20% interest rate on a credit card.
Right.
But of course, we've got the finance company loans, which I think now they're going to have to be 35% interest, not the 40 or 45. I think that the rule comes into effect January 1st.
Yep.
We'll do a podcast in the new year about that, perhaps. But then you got the payday loans, your favorite,
right?
Which in Ontario at the moment can charge 390% interest.
Still $15 on 100 every 2 weeks.
Which 15 times 26, if you get paid every 2 weeks, is 390 on a $100 loan.
Right.
So
Jesus,
that makes the first 2 points even worse.
It does. So the first point was the reality, right? The debt is always a big number. The second is they're charging you money to use it. And this one is the more debt you've got, the higher the interest rate they're going to charge you because it's riskier that you're going to pay them back.
It just gets worse and worse. Okay, so the conventional wisdom is if I have a high interest debt, right, I've got a credit card, I got a payday loan, whatever, then what I should do is go to the bank and get a debt consolidation loan.
Right.
And the concept is I take all my debt and rather than paying 20 or 30 or 390% interest, maybe the bank will loan me money at only 15% interest. So more of my payment goes towards principal and not interest.
Yeah, that theory's been around for a long time. I remember when we started up, personal lines of credit were not very common at that time. And the banks clued into this, this consolidation loan we have to borrow. Why don't we approve people for effectively a consolidation loan before they actually need the money? So you get a personal line of credit that's got a better interest rate than a credit card, a higher spending limit, better payment terms to give the money back.
So obviously the banks want to lend money because that's how they make money.
Their money.
They only want to lend to people who can pay them back. So why is it then that everybody just doesn't go out and get a consolidation loan?
Well, because the banks are very good about telling you they'll do this. They're not very good about delivering on it. The most common example now of being able to get a consolidation loan is they will consolidate your products that you have with them. So let's say I bank at a great big bank, because everybody does, and I've got a credit card and a checking account, and I've got an overdraft and a line of credit. And they've all got different interest rates and different repayment terms. Well, the bank will probably quite happily put that into a consolidation loan with one payment for all of them. What they won't do is add in my Capital One card, my MBNA card, my installment loan off the internet, all that, because now they're assuming risk for other people's debts. By consolidating their own products, they're making it more likely that they will get repaid. If they pay off everybody else's credit cards, it's more likely that they won't get paid.
Well, and if when they do that loan, they say, oh, by the way, we're going to secure it with your car or your house or something, right, then they haven't lent you any extra money, but they've increased their security.
So they've improved their position.
So the reason people don't get debt consolidation loans is, number one, the bank says no.
Right.
The other reason is the complexity of the whole thing.
Right.
So just before we started recording, I was on the phone with somebody who has a debt situation, and they said we went in and talked to the bank, and we came out more confused than when we went in because they're talking about this and that and all the rest of it. And like, does the average person, and I guess everybody watching this can pause the tape after I ask this question and shout out your answer. Do you know the difference between amortization period and term?
No.
No. And so when the bank starts throwing numbers at you, And of course, that would really mostly apply in a mortgage situation. But you get all these fancy numbers, and it's like, okay, this is getting to be kind of overwhelming.
Well, every industry has their jargon or nomenclature, and they use those words not intentionally to intimidate, but they always do.
Yeah, and that's what throws people off. And just so that people know what we're talking about, you can get a 25-year mortgage, 25-year amortization mortgage, but it renews every 5 years.
In Canada.
In Canada. I mean, obviously, I think they have 30 years now, and you can get shorter or whatever. So just because you've got a 25-year amortization doesn't mean the mortgage rate is locked in for 25 years. It's locked in for whatever the term is. But the point is, it gets really confusing, and all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I'm just shutting down.
Right.
Paralysis by analysis, I can't do it. So I think the complexity is what caused a lot of people problems.
Well, but before you move on from this one, there's a huge flaw in getting a consolidation loan. If you don't cancel all the credit items you had before you got the loan, you're just going to double down. So, you've got $20,000, $30,000 worth of credit cards, lines of credit. You put it consolidated. That's great. Things are cleaner. They're going well. And then you run up the damn $20,000 or $30,000 worth of credit cards again. So a year and a half later, instead of owing $30,000, now you owe $60,000 and you're in a lot more trouble.
Yeah, and sometimes the bank will say, okay, in your example where I'm consolidating everything at the same bank, well, we're going to cancel your credit card. We're going to eliminate your overdraft. But they haven't done the same with the other ones. So you're right.
Well, even if they did, it won't stop you from applying for new ones.
And your credit probably looks better because you just qualified for a loan.
So don't do that.
Well, the other basic flaw with a consolidation loan is it does not reduce your debt.
Right.
If you consolidate 5 different credit cards that were $30,000 into a $30,000 loan, you still owe $30,000. Now, hopefully the interest rate is lower.
Yes.
And maybe your life is simpler because you're only making 1 payment a month, not 5. But yeah, it's not the panacea that we all think it could be. So, okay, next item on my list. And again, the question we're answering today is, why is it so hard to get out of debt? The next item on my list is either social or family pressure.
Right.
So give me your thoughts on why pressure would cause you trouble.
So, you're at a barbecue because we're recording this in the summer, talking about family stuff, what's going on. And people will tell you that they've had a cancer diagnosis. It's horrible, but we're going to talk about it. They won't tell you that they've got 3 letters from collection agencies saying they're not paying their bills on time. We just don't talk about financial problems.
Why not?
And because of the stigma attached to it. Everybody's just supposed to naturally know how to handle your money. It's just what you do because you're an adult. Yeah,
and you can look at someone and go, oh, they drive a fancy car. Mm-hmm. And when they look at us, they go, oh, they're wearing very fancy clothes. They must be very wealthy.
Same white shirt on every one of your recordings.
Right. What's the deal? Why is he wearing a black shirt with a black background? Don't they have people that tell them what to wear? So it's when you see that fancy car or the fancy house or whatever, it's like, oh, they must be doing really well.
Right.
And so it's even worse, I guess, to say, well, as a matter of fact, no, it's leased, there's a loan, it's a big interest, whatever.
I'm fully leveraged and 1 paycheck away from hell.
Yeah. And we don't want to say that. So I think as a result of that, we don't want to talk about it. And as a result, it's harder to find solutions if you don't talk about it.
Right. Because not everyone is a financial expert. And you aren't given any kind of training on how to deal with these things in school. Even if you Google stuff on the internet, they're probably trying to sell you something. In most cases, it's a new loan.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, all these credit apps that tell you your credit score, well, they're really just sales tools to get you to borrow more. So as a result, you suffer in silence. And you're not finding the solutions that you need. That's not a good thing. That's what makes it harder. We're going to talk about solutions at the end of this, but I think the obvious next step on that is the whole, mental health issues that come from this. So, I don't know what you want to call it, the mental discomfort, the angst, whatever you want to call it. It just, weighs on people and just makes it worse.
Yeah. I mean, once you start feeling stress, your body does a lot of things in response. So one of the ways people cope with stress is they kind of shut down. So instead of actively dealing with the problem, they avoid or ignore the problem. Well, and that as an underlying problem creates more stress because you're not dealing with it, but you're not recognizing that you're not dealing with it. Or I don't know, you've had a hard day at work, you finish everything. You should be going home, making a plan for the groceries, a budget, whatever, go out and shop, but I'll just pick up pizza on the way home because it's easier. Suddenly you find out that you're doing that 2 or 3 days a week and it's a snowball that starts to build.
I like pizza.
I know you do.
And you're right, it's a snowball. it just makes it makes it worse and worse and worse. And so now I've got all this anxiety. I've now got depression. And am I still showing up to work and doing a great job? Am I taking sick days? Am I going to risk getting laid off?
Am I yelling at people all the time? Or am I, sitting in my room in the dark at night because I'm afraid to go out because I don't have any money?
Yep. Yeah, it just makes it worse and worse and worse. And if that impacts my income, and in your example, that impacts my expenses, well, now I've got even less money to be applying against debt. So I think we have to recognize that is all very real. Now, here's a term, and I think we're going to do a full podcast on this because I like this term.
Today.
Not today. Debt fatigue.
Is that a type of clothing?
I don't know. No, that would be fatigue. You're right. So what is debt fatigue? Is that really what we've just been talking about it, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it's a different way of expressing what we were talking about. Effectively, if you've been dealing with a problem and it gets to the point where you're just tired of dealing with the damn problem, you tend to ignore it. So debt fatigue is, I've got all this debt. I can't get rid of it. It's piling up every month. All the signs are there. I'm getting phone calls. I'm getting letters, and I just ignore it.
Yeah, and I guess it would be the same as having a health problem that you just ignore, or any other kind of issues. I got a leak in my roof. Well, I'm just going to ignore it because I'm just so overburdened and overwhelmed with everything else. And again, I think that's real, and I think it has become even more prevalent in the last 4.5 years, given the events in the world.
Probably.
That it's like, you know what? I was doing okay, not great, but okay. And then a bunch of stuff happened and I don't see any way out. So it's like, you know what? I'm just going to ignore it.
Right.
Which in the short term might work. In the long term, not so good. So final reason on my list, why is it so hard to get out of debt? I think kind of tied into what you said earlier about not wanting to talk about it. It's, I don't want to go out and get any help on it.
Right. And if you can't get any help and you don't know the solution yourself, nothing's going to get solved.
And part of it is, I don't even know where I should go to get help.
Right. Not the internet.
So the internet solves all problems. So am I supposed to talk to a lawyer? Is this because I'm getting these legal letters? So do I need I can't afford a lawyer. They're like $600 an hour. Right. I don't have an accountant because I'm just a person. I don't have, an accounting firm working for me.
And every time I ask a question at the bank, they try to sell me an RSP.
That's right. So it's like, or a loan. So what am I supposed to going to do? Obviously, if you have a medical problem, you go to a medical professional. But even that's a little, okay, so do I need a nutritionist, a doctor? Or what do I need? So we're going to talk about that as well. So here are the implications of excessive debt. We're going to touch on this briefly, and then we'll talk about solutions. Debt does not go away on its own.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of how compounding works, right? You got to do something or else it just gets worse. Like there are very few scenarios where ignoring it's just going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, there are examples in life where if you ignore a problem, you can go along for quite a while. Because of the compounding effects of interest, you can't do that with debt. If you got a pile of debt and you do nothing, don't make any payments, next month it's a bigger pile.
Yeah, you're right. Some problems, I guess, do go away if you ignore them.
Well, so you got the check engine lights on your car. Mm-hmm. It means you need a new oxygen sensor for those of you that know that sort of thing. But you can drive that car with a check engine light on for a very long time. Whereas if you've got a loan that you don't pay, well, so the next month now you're paying interest on the interest. And the month after that, you're paying interest on the interest on the interest. And at some point, and it'll be very quickly, that debt's going to get completely out of hand.
Yeah, and I guess it's sort of like some medical problems. If I get stung by a bee, well, you know what? If I ignore it for a week, it will just correct itself on its own.
Unless you're allergic to bee stings.
Then I'm probably already dead.
Right.
I whack my arm on something and I get a bruise. Okay, ignoring it is probably the right answer. Unless I broke my arm, then I got to do something. But with debt, there is no scenario where, I guess maybe you could win the lottery or something, but there's no scenario where, okay, just ignoring it, it just solves itself. I guess the only scenario I could think of is I'm creditor proof. I'm not working. I'm retired. My only income is CPP and OAS, and I owe Visa money. Well, if I'm not banking at the bank where the Visa card is, I guess there's nothing they can do to me, so I guess I can ignore it. But that's not the scenario for the vast majority of people.
Right.
You've got to actually take some action. So, but in that scenario, let's just say I just completely ignore it and I just, I've got debt fatigue. I'm not paying it back. What's going to happen then? If I just never pay my debt back, what will ultimately happen?
Well, at some point, the people that you owe, the corporation, the bank, whatever you want to call them, are going to take steps to collect on their debt. So the first thing they do is just the polite reminder, you didn't pay us last month. Please do. If you've made the payment, we're sorry we bothered you. The second month, they're not going to put the polite part in there. Hey, you didn't make your payment last month. Contact us and make a payment. Third month, they're probably going to subcontract it out to some sort of collection agency.
And then we're taking you to court,
right.
And then we're suing you.
Yeah,
and
the snowball we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, well, it works the same way with collections. So it's a little tiny thing that if you deal with, you can get rid of. The next month it's bigger, and then it just snowballs into something out of control.
And so you want to deal with it before you get to that point. Okay, so then let's talk about practical advice then. So we've determined that in most cases, doing nothing is probably not the correct answer,
right?
Because it will snowball out of control. So somebody comes in to see you, they've got too much debt. What's step one?
Okay. Well, first we got to try and get our hands around the problem. So most folks that come to see us think they owe X amount of dollars. And then when we actually take stock, we put together a detailed list, they find out it's X plus Y. And it's usually X plus Y is significantly bigger than X by itself.
Yeah, and that happens all the time.
Right, almost every time.
Almost every time. So again, I was speaking to a lady this morning, and same situation. Tell me, okay, boom, boom, she rhymes them all off to me. And then I said, okay, well, just to be sure, let's pull a copy of your credit report. And of course, half the people have them on their phones already, but
right.
She went to Equifax TransUnion, you can get them for free, easy to do, boom. And there was a debt on there that we hadn't talked about. I'm going, well, what's this debt? Oh, well, that's something for my water softener or something like that. Okay, but that's still a debt.
It's money that you owe.
It's money that you owe. So I agree. Number one, it's, let's make a list of everybody you owe money to. Right. And there's a couple of ways to do that. The obvious way is pull your credit report because most things are listed on there. The other thing is take a look at your bank statement for all the payments that go out every month. And that list should be who you owe money to, how much it is.
And, how preferably, what are the expected payments that they're looking for, and how much is it costing you to borrow that? What's the interest rate?
And then, like, if you're really sophisticated like you and me, you can put it on a spreadsheet.
Right, well, yes.
And then you can sort it by highest interest rate or whatever.
And we're not doing this because we're sadists. We're not trying to convince you that you got more debt than you can deal with. We're trying to show you how big the problem really is. You can't solve a problem until you recognize that it's there. And part of recognizing it is realizing that's the size and the scope of the problem.
Yeah, because in some cases, the answer is, oh, well, you don't owe as much as you thought. Again, another person I talked to, this is why we shouldn't record in the afternoon, because I've already talked to a bunch of people and I got all these stories, but they've got a cash flow crunch now because their income has dropped, but they own a property. It's going to take a number of months due to the circumstances to sell the property, but when they do, there will be a pile of cash there. So they don't have a debt problem so much as a cash flow problem, which brings us to the second item on the list.
Right.
Here's a list of all my debts, who they are, what the interest rates are. And then the next element is cash flow, which the fancy word for that, of course, is budget.
Right.
What's your advice there?
Well, and so very few people prepare budgets anymore, but it's pretty simple. Money coming in, income, government pensions, whatever the money is, versus money going out. So you start by making a complete inventory list. So this is what happened last month. This is what came in. This is what I spent. Then you take a look at what you spent and said, well, how many of these things can I reduce or can I do without? You put together let's call it a living budget. What do you need to actually get by every month? And then, well, that'll tell you how much is left over to pay with your debts.
And that's why we're doing this whole analysis. How much is left over? So I got to pay my rent. I got to buy food, probably have some kind of transportation expenses, bus fare, gas for the car, or whatever. And then I've got my utilities. I got to pay those. Yep. And then, a whole bunch of other things too, potentially.
Well, and most of your expenses are going to be the same every month too. That's why we're saying you could look at last month's bank statement and you could probably plot this out. Like it's not the day-to-day stuff. You know what those are going to be. It's this unexpected stuff that you've always put on your credit.
Yeah, or stuff that does not occur every month. So you pay your car insurance once a year, for example, or Christmas only comes once a year, your kid's birthday once a year, your summer vacation once a year. So you got to take a look at those expenses. You're right. It's the unanticipated ones that when what do you say, your sensor light? What was the thing that went on?
Your check engine light?
Yeah. So I don't know if I have an oxygen thing in my car.
You do.
I don't think my car uses oxygen.
I'm sure you have one of these lights in your car.
Well, I definitely have the check engine light.
I'm sure it's been on.
It's on most of the time.
particularly when it went underwater.
Yes, that was a fun one. And then I go in and they say, "Oh yeah, there's something broken." Oh, okay,
Right,
that's what it is. So so I've done 2 steps here. I've made a list of everybody I owe money to, and then I've made a list of what comes in and what comes out. And so when I do that, it says X number of dollars at the bottom is what's left over. So now what?
So that's the maximum amount you have available to deal with unexpected contingencies or your debt. Right. And depending on what that number is, we can figure out, okay, how are we going to deal with the debts with this amount of money every month to play with it?
Yeah. So when I made the list of the debts, one of your suggestions was, what's the minimum payment each month?
Right.
If the minimum payment is $1,000 and my budget surplus is $500,
Houston, we got a problem.
I got a problem.
Right.
And I think for our average client, we're closer to like $2,000.
Yes, and the money available, again, for the average client is about $250.
Yeah, not even close.
Right.
And so you're right. Houston, we got a problem. It clearly doesn't work. Let's take the simpler scenario, though, where, okay, it costs $1,000 a month to service my debt, and I've got $1,000 a month available, or maybe even a little more.
Right.
Okay, then what? What's my thought process?
So now you need some discipline on how are you going to deal with these debts. And there are a couple of different schools of thought. One is, deal with the debt you can pay off the quickest because you get the satisfaction knowing that debt is done.
My $100 cell phone bill, let's just clean it up.
I'm a bigger fan of figure out which one is charging the highest interest rate and pound away at that one because it'll save you the most money long term.
I am in the same camp. That's what I believe in.
But we're accountants and nobody likes us.
Right. I understand the psychology, though. If I've got 3 $200 debts, just clean them up, and that's things I don't have to worry about. I mean, obviously, you could also sell off assets.
Yeah. So we've gone through the first couple of steps, right? We figured out how big the problem is. We figured out what we've got available monthly to deal with it, and more importantly, what we need monthly to live. We're looking for now the sequence of events to deal with the debt. We know we need more money. So now your suggestion of sell off assets. I'm not a big fan of this depending on what the asset is. So for example, it's easy to cash out a tax-free savings account. Okay, there's no tax implications in that. It doesn't bother me as much. But you start cashing out your RSPs, now you're basically trading on the future for today. I have an issue with that, and it's something that should be avoided.
Well, you got to look at the numbers. You're right. So if I take X number of dollars out of my RSP, maybe the bank only withholds 10 or 20%, but I've got to include the whole thing in my income. And if I happen to be in the 40% tax bracket, when I file my taxes next year, I owe a whole bunch more money, which I don't have because I've already cashed in my RSP.
On top of that, your RSP is probably protected. So that if you don't cash it out, nobody can come and take it away from you, unlike your tax-free savings account, which they could. So you just got to be careful when you start selling off assets. Well, before you start selling off assets, I think you're better off to go to the next step in our process is really get some external help.
So we're going to talk about that. Yeah, if I've got a second car that I don't drive because I work from home now, fine, sell it. That's kind of a no-brainer. But in a lot of cases, you don't have any assets anyways. That's why we're having this discussion. Yep. Okay, so the final step of the process then is you've done the math and it's like, okay, my minimum monthly payments are $2,000 and I got $200 available. Clearly the math doesn't work. So I phone up Hoyes-Michael and Associates, the sponsors of this podcast, because nobody else would sponsor it. So we're now the sponsors.
Right.
And so you're going to say, okay, I'm glad you phoned me and not one of those unlicensed debt consultants because they're gonna just hose you.
Right.
What do you say then? What are the options you're presenting?
All right. Well, so think of it as a sequence of events. We've done these things. You've done them ahead of time. We review them with you. If you haven't done them, we will help you do them while you talk to us. Is it possible that we could get you a consolidation loan to deal with the debts? Well, we've already said that they're not a great solution anyway, but odds are by the time someone calls us, it's too late for that as an option. Because if you've got, minimum payments are $1,000 a month and there's $200 to pay towards them, consolidation is not going to help. It's not that kind of savior.
And they've probably already tried that anyways.
Right. So then we look at, there's something out there called credit counseling, it's such a misnomer because so many of the debt consultants use it. It's a way of pooling your debts together to make a single monthly payment at reduced interest rates. But they're difficult to come by, and most of the folks aren't advertising this service really aren't providing it.
Well, and even if the interest rate is zero, if I've got $60,000 worth of debt over 5 years, that's $1,000. If I've only got 300, it's not going to work anyways.
Right. So now we're looking at consumer proposals, which is a legal remedy whereby you repay a portion of what you owe. And in worst case scenarios, we look at personal bankruptcy.
And in a consumer proposal, if you've got $50,000 or $60,000 worth of debt, it's based on your income and your assets. There's a whole bunch of factors, but it would not be totally crazy to be paying $300 or $400 a month, not $1,000 or $2,000.
Yeah, on $50,000 or $60,000, you'd probably pay back somewhere between $12,000 and $20,000, depending on your circumstances.
And that's why the ending of the show is you want to talk to a licensed insolvency trustee who can then walk you through all these options and give you the numbers in your specific situation. Because it is different in each case.
It is.
There is no blanket option.
Everyone is going through their own experience, but we've seen so many of these that we've got the skill set to provide you with the answers that you're looking for. At the end, it's all your decision on what you want to do. We're just going to point you in the right direction.
Right. Exactly like you would do with the doctor. Well, you could have this kind of surgery. You could do that. Okay, well, tell me all the options. We weigh the pros and cons. And because we've done, well, you and me, many tens of thousands of these over the years.
A couple.
We've got a pretty good idea. Here's what the bank is going to want in a deal. Can you afford it? If you can, great. So I think that's the concluding remark. So yeah, it is hard to get out of debt for all the reasons we've talked about, but it's not impossible. There are options.
Right.
And when you talk to a licensed insolvency trustee, whether it's at Hoyes Michaelis or somewhere else, we're going to go through each of the options. Mm-hmm. One of them will be best for you. You make that decision and then we do it.
There you go.
There you go. So it is hard to get out of debt, but there are obviously options. So that is our show for today. As always, please like, subscribe, put comments on YouTube about Ted's shirt, my shirt, whatever you want to do. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the different podcasting apps. There is a new show that is released every Saturday morning, including next Saturday morning.
How exciting.
We'll see what shirts we're wearing then. We're going to record in the morning, though, not the afternoon.
Is it going to be about debt fatigue?
It'll probably, no, maybe. You never know. You're going to have to tune in to find out. So until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.